What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Alpha Skies, and today we're going to be covering what is to be a very, very hot topic right now in the community of Destiny 2, and in my personal opinion, go over what I think to be are some major key points in a lot of the arguments and stuff that are going on right now, and I think these honestly really desperately need to be addressed. But first, I'd like to go ahead and add some context to the specific situation that we're going to be talking about, and it's going to involve two major key points, one of which being in the most recent of this week at Bungie, we have seen a post about the Divinity being nerfed, and then the other point of this being that we have seen streamers and stuff complain specifically about this weapon for several months now, as they have said that this weapon is way too overpowered and does need an adjustment. This has caused major tear in the actual Destiny 2 community, as some people have argued it never really needed to be nerfed in the first place, while the other half of it says it's not that big of a nerf, nor is it even that big of a deal. But we are also unfortunately seeing a lot of people actually go after these specific individuals that said this weapon needed to be nerfed, and really honestly going at them at a very personal level that people should not be doing, and quite frankly just harassing these individuals in a very disgusting manner. But more on that specific point later. We're going to go ahead and jump into the actual controversy itself and take a look at both sides of the argument. So let's first take a look at the people that are arguing that the weapon did not need to be nerfed in the first place. So for those that are unaware of what the Divinity is, it is an exotic trace rifle, and what this weapon does with its perk Judgment is that sustained damage with the weapon will envelop the target in a very big bubble field that weakens and stuns them if they are overload champions. And the enemy in question who has received this debuff actually gets a global 30% damage debuff all around. So I think it's pretty safe to say that the weapon as a whole in a lot of the very higher end challenge content is an extremely useful and an extremely powerful weapon to use. So again, it's no surprise to see that most teams, whenever they are doing activities like champion mode activities, day one raids, that sort of deal, that they are going to be having this weapon ready to go in their arsenal. Personally, I do feel that majority of the complaints about this weapon not needing this debuff and whatnot that we are going to be receiving in Season 19 is going to come really primarily from a lot more of the casual player base of the game. And honestly, I think both sides of the argument have a point, and with the casual player base, their major point being that this game is way too RNG reliant. And I can absolutely see that point, but for a lot of people that they want to come back and say that, well, there are craftable weapons in the game, but again, think about it. That is one thing that the community has actually been together on for the last several months now, is that the craftable system inside of this game, quite frankly, it's garbage. So a lot of these casual players that actually want to get on and enjoy the activities that they do, play the campaigns, and enjoy the game the way that they want to, use the builds they want to, end up actually being punished in long-term content because they simply don't have the time or the resources, as the resources for crafting are really awful to obtain, that they just don't have that time to go and level all of these weapons and raid prep like some of us other players do. So for a lot of people that are coming with the counter argument of that it's really not that hard, there are craftable weapons in the game and whatnot, honestly, I think that's a really piss poor argument, because you can't go around complaining about how the crafting system is terrible, but then tell people the workaround for getting good gear is going to be this amazing, cool, unique crafting system that we have. And although I do have to agree that Divinity is absolutely OP, I also thought that it was absolutely one of its strongest points, is that it was very helpful when it came to the casual player base in the community. It simply gave flexibility to all these players that didn't have the time to go farm and grind these god rolls of all these crazy high DPS weapons, and I felt like Divinity was something that was an absolute lifesaver for D2. As somebody who played a lot of Destiny 1 and had to deal with a lot of gatekeeping back in those days, where if you didn't have specific weapons, cough cough Galahorn, you were not allowed to participate with other groups and activities. But let's go ahead and jump to the other side of the argument about the Divinity being too OP and absolutely needing this nerf. I do think one terrible argument we are seeing for that I think people honestly need to stop trying to use as an excuse whatsoever is simply telling people to get good. This is a very piss poor argument, doesn't help anybody genuinely at all. It's no benefit to the community whatsoever, and honestly it just kind of makes you look like a bit of an asshole. But the reverse is also true for all of the people that are going after Salty Greppo and stuff and absolutely just unleashing hell because we are getting a 50% nerf to this weapon and it's going down to only a 15% global debuff. Need to relax and understand that honestly it's not a huge deal. And really the only thing that I actually think we're going to be seeing by this very little bit of an adjustment to Divinity is going to be seeing that people are going to have to pay a little more attention to their gear and stuff, make sure they've got some at least semi-ready gear and stuff like that that's got some good damage perks, you know, make sure they've at least got some semi-decent rolls. But also, again, the 30% global debuff being cut in half to 15% is just not that big of a deal. In my personal opinion, the fact that it creates the precision sphere on a target, that almost on its own, in my opinion, is worth the exotic slot. So with it being cut down to 15%, I don't think you should worry all that much about your raid content all that much. I don't think it's going to change that drastically. This is really nice, honestly. I think it's going to actually help Bungie and kind of force them to make a little bit of changes and stuff when it comes to shadow Shot. And I saw on Twitter people discussing different things that are going to need to be changed or that should be changed for quality of life to kind of help the game out and kind of help readjust where things were. And the absolute best recommendation I saw was simply that for Shadow Shot, make it like the new arc staff. When you shoot a target, it's an arrow, and it essentially creates an AoE and debuffs everything inside of that, because the biggest issue with Shadow Shot right now is that you can shoot a boss, that boss can just walk out of the radius, and that debuff is now completely useless. And again, this debuff is not that bad. So for all these people that are going around just jumping all over the ass of all of these streamers and content creators, please, it's not that big of a deal. Just stop. Now let's go ahead and jump into the major point that I've got coming up next, and is that, do high-end players and content creators actually have an influence of what happens in these games? And quite honestly, I'm going to be real with you, I think they do. I think there's no doubt that they have an influence of what goes on in these games. Do I think they have an absolute sure shot say, like people are insisting they do? No. But I do think it's pretty oblivious to sit there and believe that a lot of these very top-end content creators that play and invest so many hours in this game, and they're obviously going to know a little bit better about what's going to be good in terms of the health and integrity of this game, that the team isn't going to at least listen to some of their feedback, because these people know more about the game than you do, and I think that's pretty obvious. And I think if you genuinely want to be mad at anybody, then start pointing your fingers at Bungie's and not these individuals, because although they may have an influence, Bungie is going to be the company that has the ultimate say. These are the people that do make these decisions for the integrity and for the life of the game that we enjoy. And honestly, there's plenty of reasons to be mad at this company as a whole right now, as they keep making absolutely garbage changes for the integrity of the game. I think it's absolutely goofy. They don't want to go and fix the dungeon. That was one of their major selling points and stuff this season, but we gotta nerf that Eager's Edge, guys. Because I do feel like more and more lately, and I think a lot of people can also agree with this, that Bungie has more often than not felt like they're absolutely just ignoring the community. I mean, take a look at some of the videos that we saw Sweatsickle posting, talking about people that were allegedly being falsely banned. It took them days to actually address that issue. They didn't apologize to the players or anything, mind you. They didn't do that, not for the people that had to wait days to get their accounts back, but they absolutely blew over it like it wasn't that big of a deal, and that they were going to look at fixing that later. So I think actually getting down to it, I think the real reason we are upset here isn't even because of the nerf, because again, let's be real, this nerf is not that big of a deal. Divinity is still a phenomenal weapon. We're still going to be using it. It's not going to stop being used here. But rather, I think we're upset because it feels like they are listening to more of these elitist content creators and stuff way more than they are actually listening to us as individuals and as the community. Because again, there is shit we've been begging for them to fix for a long time now. I mean, for a very long time, and they are still not fixing a lot of these issues that are still plaguing the game. I mean, cheaters are running absolutely rampant through the game right now. There are videos blowing up on Twitter of people going in different activities and stuff with this crazy infinite xenophage ammo with like 900 RPMs, just melting through bosses like they're nothing. And I think it's more frustrating than anything that a community that is literally watching these problems and whatnot, or at least that's what it feels like, because remember, they are not addressing it, but they are going to go and address something like Divinity and go out of their way to nerf this. So kind of back to that major point that I talked about earlier. Stop harassing the streamers. They're not the ones making these bad decisions. They are not the ones that are going around in Bungie Studios themselves going, yeah, no, this is what we've got to do. I know all of our other content is literally unplayable and broken, but, you know, we got to make sure that this Divinity is tuned down a bit for the next day one raid. But jumping into my absolute final point here, let's go ahead and move away from all of the harassing and stuff like that about the raids and stuff like that in the future. And I think we need to actually talk about something that I do think is a bit more important, and that this Divinity nerf is actually going to hurt substantially. And I think that's going to be Grandmaster Nightfalls. Divinity was a phenomenal weapon for Grandmaster Nightfalls, and I think Nightfalls are going to see quite a bit of a hit here, because in Grandmasters, you didn't have as much of a trade-off as you get in raids. You know, in a raid, you essentially lose 100% of DPS from one individual, but with that 30% global debuff, you gain roughly around 150% roughly increased damage from all of the individuals around you, making it a good trade-off as a whole. But in Grandmasters, again, which pretty much all of the community as a whole can agree with right now is in an absolute garbage state, the 30% was actually a relatively good trade-off. You lose around 100% of your damage, while the trade-off is that your team around you gains roughly around a 60%. content. And I think with this being the case, this is going to again further push and warrant Bungie to do something about the absolute garbage state of Grandmaster Nightfalls right now, because Divinity is not going to be as strong, and you still are going to have to level all the way up to these crazy, ridiculously high levels and grind all the way up to get this in-game loot and whatnot, but then you're going to be going in there just to be greeted with the fact that it's a little bit harder now. But once again, and I cannot stress it enough again because I'm just absolutely tired of seeing the absolute just brain-dead nonsense all over Twitter of people spatting the dumbest garbage I've ever seen, this is not the streamer's fault or the content creator's fault, guys. This purely comes down to that right at this moment, Bungie is messing up, and that is all it is, and all we can do is continue to play the game if you want to, don't play the game if you don't want to, or, you know, whatever it may be. But if you choose to stick around, then you just have to sit and pray that the company is going to learn from all of the massive mistakes that they've been making. But with all of that out of the way, if you guys enjoy these types of videos, feel free to hit that like button or even the subscribe button down below. It really helps me out a lot, and I'll be catching you guys in the next video.